This is his newest book that he and Jon Frederick edited together. I'm pleased to have a chapter in it. Richard has a chapter in it, and today he's going to give us some information about the book, and you can give any other information you want. Tom, it's yours.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You bet.
I appreciate it. As Robert and Richard have said, there is a new book out, and I'm going to be describing it for the rest of this session so people know what's in store and whether they might be interested in learning about it. Or it's hard copy as well as an ebook form, and it can be tracked down on Amazon right away for anyone who's interested. But what I thought I would do with this time is really kind of give the story of where it came from, the personal stories, and also talk about each author and what they've contributed. So we'll proceed. Let me get onto my screen. There we go. What the intent of the book is to provide useful current clinical information. And the word I kept using was in the trenches, meaning we wanted to know what people are actually doing. And there are a lot of extremely good books out there which give background information. And for example, Richard and Rob's book, Doing Neurofeedback, is an excellent resource. Paul Swingle has a book or books. John Demos has a book. Others have created some really good references that people use. But what struck me at this point was that it really would be nice for clinicians to go somewhere to learn what exactly are people actually doing. And so we looked for authors who were currently in practice and who were clinicians. And we didn't put any restriction on what kind of equipment or software or techniques or anything like that was used. So we left it quite open, and so we saw a need to for this clinically current and relevant information to be available, and it was sort of thought of as a follow-on or supplement to these various books, including the one that I had authored, which was Technical Foundations of Neurofeedback. And people said, well, this is great foundational material, but what are people actually doing? So around November 2013, which shows you how long this book took to accomplish, I sent out invitations to over 50 people, tried to send one to just about everybody I could think of who was a reasonable candidate. And I said to each author, you can suggest your own topics, whatever you want to write about. And I also, in some cases, suggested. I said, well, you know, you're good at this, you're good at that. I'd suggest it, but they could do whatever they want. Sort of like the Electoral College, right? Anyway, a total of 59 people came back and said they would contribute. So that kind of got us started. And so we had all these people beginning to submit information. And this is the letter that went out. I think people might be interested to see exactly what the wording was. It said, we have an opportunity to work together on a new reference book that will be a solid resource for QEEG and neurofeedback, basically an encyclopedia, what the thought was then, since has turned into a handbook. I've been invited to edit a new book. This was by Routledge, and I'm writing to invite you to become a contributor. The intent of this book is to provide advanced material on the foundations and clinical applications using clinicians as authors. I would like to invite you to contribute a chapter to this important new book. While this book is not yet formally accepted, it is an invited work and would be published by a leading established academic publisher. It will likely become an important and well-recognized resource. You would be one of a distinguished list of experienced and recognized clinicians and experts. And as I say, about almost 60 people said, sure, I'll do it. I'll get involved. So time went on. To be more specific, what we asked for was, at this point, approximately 10 to 20 pages, depending on depth and scope. The first 1 to 3 pages should be background material, citing published material in support of the approaches described in your chapter. The next portion should describe the methods used for assessment and neurofeedback using techniques applied. Finally, clinical case studies, possibly including citations of previous work, can be presented, showing results that have been achieved. Finally, a discussion of the overall effectiveness, possible future considerations, alternatives, or extensions of the methods. Now, here's where it gets entertaining. This was in mid-2013. I said the goal is to have a first draft of the material submitted by the end of January 2014, and to have a final version completed in March in time for a summer 2014 publication. Well, as you see, we've missed that goal by 2 years, and we'll see why and how that all happened. The good news is we have the book, and we do think it's really a really good book. So in May of 2014, when I saw all these articles starting to pile in, it became obvious that this was an ambitious thing, and I called my friend Jon Frederick, who has published in the past and is just a good worker, and I said, John, you want to help? Let's co-edit this thing. We got lots of chapters piling in, and I asked him, do you want to co-edit the book? He said, well, okay. John's a cautious guy, but in this case, he joined in. So chapters were coming in from March 2014, and they just kept coming in for, it turned out to be almost a year. It took for everybody to pile in all their chapters. And as you very well know, a lot of people get tied up and they can't do it. And it takes 6 months or 8 months or 9 months or whatever. And we did want to get everybody in here who was going to reasonably contribute. So we had a compilation around May 2015, and then I realized there's just a huge pile of work. Jon Frederick and I are asking now, it's just turning into organizing, just arranging it into sections, reading everything all over again. So I got in touch with Jerry Kiffer, who's a biofeedback practitioner from the Cleveland Clinic, decades past. I've known him for decades. And Jerry came on board then as an organizer and to write an introduction. So we reviewed and edited things through about 2015. By that time, we wound up with 34 authors from the original 59 who said they would write something. We got the drafts. Took, again, almost 6 months, more than 6 months to just get all the drafts, and they were exhaustively. Richard and Rob, you want to talk about the editing process? It was exhaustive.
I'll certainly chime in and say, yeah, Tom, I did a book like this years ago with multiple authors like you that I edited, and with people around the world. So I think many of your authors are not just U.S. people, they're people in other countries. So you're trying to coordinate, create a bit of a single process where it all fits APA style. And if you're taking anybody who's good at what they do and they're busy, then they never meet deadlines.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
And that's true. And the editors were just between Jerry, John, and Routledge. There was just enormous editing attention, tremendous focus. And then in May of 2016, Taylor and Francis provided this enormous email, which we affectionately, it was labeled 56 queries. They literally had 56 exhaustive questions to all the authors. What does this mean? Well, how does it? So really, they're in a lot of detail. The work was basically done in July of 2016, at which point Routledge said, okay, we're going to schedule this thing for October. And for a while, we were hoping to see it in October and such. And again, just details, cleaning things up, picking the color plates and all that. So the book is released. If you go to Amazon, you'll see it, and now it's available. So where do we go from here? There it is. Finally, we got the book in our hands just 2 or 3 days ago, right?
Yeah. Yep. Just got a copy myself. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Every author's got a copy now. Even if there were 2 authors on a chapter, they send a copy for each. And so there we are. Now, here's the citation for the book, 2016 Handbook of Clinical QEEG and Neurotherapy. There are other books with similar titles. Our book has the word clinical, and that's really the big deal in our book. And what I'm going to do, these are the contributors, but what I'm going to do quickly is just pop down here and go to the Amazon, and Amazon will be kind enough to land on my screen here, and Handbook of Clinical QEEG, and there it is. It comes up like that. So the book is available. It's not, you can get it for way below the list price generally if you pay attention. But it's got 560 plus pages. And so that's just so you see how it fits in there. And then there's some review comments, which I'm going to go into when we go back to the PowerPoint and such. Let me close that, go back to PowerPoint. Current slide, okay, let me go up. So it's available in hardback and in ebook. And I will mention at the outset, for hardback, they use color plates, which means only some of the figures are in color. The ones that really needed to be in color are in color. And if you get the ebook, however, everything is in color. So that's kind of one of the nice things about the ebook, is that everything is in a color format. So it's 555 pages, 150 plus figures, 30 plus tables, 32 color figures. The index, also 10 pages long, has 600 or 700 topics. So it's kind of interesting. You can go to the index and look up for just things, you know, anything you might want, disequilibrium or Norman Deutsch or, you know, all kinds of things, neuromeditation. The index is pretty interesting for them. So here's our contributors. These are the people who finally wound up contributing. And it's a really interesting group. As Rob mentioned, there are international people. So we have authors from Canada and Europe and United Kingdom and all that kind of stuff. Rob is there, Richard's there. There's probably a few people on the call who are authors. Jon Frederick contributed a chapter, and my group also contributed a chapter. So we're really happy that this was the group that finally came through and got us 28 chapters for this book. So we were very lucky to get a couple good reviews right off the bat. This one here from Joel Lubar, who looked at the book in pre-publication. He calls it an outstanding introduction to a very diverse field, which was the intent. And he compliments the authors for their contributions and points out that it includes everything from basic neurofeedback to applications for different age groups. The book does have resources on dyslexia, addiction, other clinical entities, so you can go at it from that direction. It does cover Loretta and S-Loretta Z-score in several of the chapters and in several types of use, which we'll be talking about. So we're very thankful for Joel to be so kind about it. And David Trudeau, also the editor of the journal Neurotherapy, gave us a little sideways, clinical rather than scientific in tone, but I'll take that as a compliment because that was the goal. Practical with useful anecdotal information that will appeal to practitioners. And again, said the authors are well respected. So this is, it was nice to see that these people see the book for what it is and that it would have value. And yeah, it does contain anecdotal information and single subject type results that don't make it into the peer-reviewed controlled study literature, but nonetheless very, very important. And so this book is going to be 10 years or so ahead of where the slower chasing after us, the controlled studies and such, that right now they're still trying to prove that theta beta training works, and they'll get there in about 3 or 4 more years. Meanwhile, we're off doing S-Loretta, Z-scores, and infra-slow, and other exciting things. So once we got all the chapters, we decided to organize it. So it was kind of an organic process. We didn't want to demand that people write in certain topic areas because they might have been more comfortable elsewhere. So working with Jerry and with John, it fell into 8 parts. And the first part, and we're going to describe all the parts during the webinar so you get a sense for who wrote the chapter, what are they talking about, et cetera, et cetera. So the first part is 6 chapters on clinical practice. And then part 2, we found 2 chapters that fit well into pediatric with children. And we then found 3 chapters written by neurologists with a neurologist perspective. So we brought those chapters together. And then, as I mentioned, 4 of the chapters at least do talk about S-Loretta, Loretta, and Z-score neurofeedback, specifically and in depth. So we brought those 4 chapters together. Then there were 4 chapters that really were going into QEEG and the brain dynamical concepts that underlie the use of QEEG. And then there were 2 chapters which are basically on alpha theta. No one really contributed much on good old alpha or good old beta, although one of these chapters does talk about alpha as well as alpha theta. And then 4 of the chapters were sufficiently novel that we just decided they need to be just in something called emerging. And those are interesting and exciting new things, things that have come up basically over the last 3 or 4 years, let's say, at the most. So that's the organization. And what I'm going to do is walk through the table of contents, as I was able to pull it off the digital file. And we'll just talk about who contributed, what they said. We'll let people make comments who want to, or maybe ask questions would be fine with me. The first chapter was written by myself and the staff at our Brain Enrichment Center. And what we do is just kind of spell out a practice model or a cookbook that emphasizes that we combine counseling principles, consultation and assessment and intake and QEEGs, and we take a very functional approach. Rather than worrying about specifically disorders or even symptoms, we focus on function. And the standardized assessments that we've landed on include not only QEEG, but we use cognitive testing, specifically the CNS vital signs that we found to be a very useful general tool, and the comprehensive neurodiagnostic checklist, the CNC 1020, is also a useful tool. We also use things like the Skill 90 and such. In some cases, we do send reports and EEGs to different databases and different services, and we're really quite inclusive. So we can show examples from not just the typical QEEG, NeuroGuide, also QEEG Pro. We also use Richard's service, NewMind, to get perspectives and also to understand the use of possibly whether supplements or behavioral interventions are appropriate. And in our chapter, we show a lot of pre and post data, QEEG data, but also anecdotal stories about what's going on with each one of these clients. And to us, every client is a story in themselves. And we give examples where, you know, someone might present with a mood issue, and on further examination, you do find that there are cognitive aspects, memory, attention, and such. And so we address these issues using Z-scores and S-Loretta and such, and give examples of what we see when clients are improving. And then, again, the literature references for the things that we point to. Then Glenn Weiner is a therapist who's been working for many years. He's on the East Coast, and he's a psychologist. And he also has written a chapter on integrating neurofeedback and QEEG with a psychotherapy practice. And he gives guidance about how to approach all the different neurofeedback modalities, whether you're interested in doing traditional evidence-based type stuff strictly, or moving forward into other avenues that are more, the word simply would be more innovative or more current, and choosing equipment, and what are the ethical issues and issues around family members, and developing as a psychotherapist. So we're very appreciative of Glenn's contribution, especially for people who are trying to figure out how to bring neurofeedback into an existing practice. Similar to, I know Paul Swingle has a nice book, I think it's called Adding Neurotherapy or Adding Neurofeedback, kind of a thing, to a practice. And to us, that's a very important aspect. Then Jim Evans came up with his really novel idea, and he said, I'm going to articulate all the variables and concerns that would make neurofeedback or neurotherapy successful or not. And it's a very challenging article. He talks about when progress is slow or when progress does not occur. He talks about things such as multiple diagnoses, major psychological components that may be strongly at issue, and talks about the concepts of what is the gain, the perceived gain that the client has, and whether the client's perceptions are compromising or fostering progress in neurotherapy. And Jim and his team also talk about socio-cultural variables and the effects of environmental events and overriding concerns. Some clients may become guilty or anxious even as training progresses. And he talks about how to deal with some of these issues. And then biological variables that we all know are very, very important. Nutrition and medications, other types of issues, whether the client might have epilepsy or have nutrition problems, etc. And he then talks also about when the EEG metrics don't change, but there is clinical improvement. And I think that's a very, very important issue. This is seen not often, but it does show up where you'll have a client and they will be improving, and you look at the EEGs and they're not getting better. They might even be quote unquote getting worse. And in these cases, we focus on the clinical issues and try and conceptualize that this is not a simple system where A goes to B and B goes to C. Sometimes these clients with long-standing issues, their EEGs aren't going to simply just get better and they get better. So that's a very helpful chapter. And again, he's got good references that support his work. Now, Jeff Tarrant, who has recently begun teaching the topic of neuromeditation, contributed a chapter. And he's also begun working more generally. He's teaching workshops and such on neuromeditation, and he's developing protocols for neuromeditation. And what Jeff has done is to, and I know Richard has done work with neuromeditation, and Jeff gives tremendous regard to Richard and others who have kind of gone forward. And Jeff has moved ahead to identify basically 4 types of meditation. And they have different EEG signatures, different therapeutic goals, and different practice models. And basically there's focused attention type of monitoring of meditation. There's an open, dispassionate monitoring type. There's an automatic self-transcending type. And finally, there's what's variously called loving kindness or compassion or heart-oriented meditation. And Jeff's chapter has a lot of citations, a lot of good references, specifics on how to do the different types of meditation and exactly protocols to go with them. So for focused attention, you reward beta 2 or gamma at FZ and alpha at PZ. And he has a Loretta protocol to go with it also, including the anterior cingulate and precuneus. And he has this for all the different types of meditation, for open monitoring, again, different uses of theta and alpha, and how to use S-Loretta to give feedback so that people are led in specific meditative directions. And I did attend his workshop just last weekend, and it was really very interesting because when you were trying to do or intending to do one type of meditation, and we hook up the equipment and go through 20 minutes or so, 30 minutes, and then go back and look at what happened, you could see that you either did or didn't go down in the direction that was being sought. So I think Jeff is adding some really good refinement to the possibility of meditation. And I want to emphasize the use of neuromeditation and meditation is really something that should be used for clients. It's not just something that you do to yourself so that you get through the day better, or you're nicer to your friends, this kind of thing, or just feeling more evolved, more centered. It's therapeutic, and meditation and mindfulness go together, and you have to be very careful and very diligent. You can have a client with anxiety that meditation will be of value, but you've got to do the right kind of meditation so that the client doesn't just go off in some direction that isn't intended. And I think Jeff's chapter, again, with its really enormous reference list, he's probably got over 100 articles. So if you want to get some good citations on algorithms and mindfulness and therapeutic use and anxiety and meditation, a lot of good data, including a lot of the Japanese studies, even from the 90s and up into this decade, this century, citations on specific aspects of that. Then Stu Donaldson and Mary from Canada wrote a chapter on neuroplasticity and chronic pain, and their emphasis is primarily biofeedback, and we were happy to have them contribute this. So talking about headaches, motor control, and basically how neuroplasticity relates to chronic pain. So even though this isn't specifically on EEG, it gives a lot of important good information how EEG could be included along with other therapies such as heart rate variability, massage therapy, stimulating types of therapies, and what types of QEEG changes might be found in these. And then there's a chapter by Rob and Michael Russo on working with forensic populations. Rob, do you want to comment on your chapter, how you approached it, how it came together, and what you'd like people to know about it?
Yeah, very quickly, because I know you've got a lot of chapters and 20 minutes left, so very quickly, and thanks for the invite. I started off working in a forensic population. I was working at a hospital, a psychiatric hospital. We had residential treatment, and that's where I started working with biofeedback. And when I was lecturing on that to people, that's where I got invited to try out neurofeedback, and the rest is history. So I was working with biofeedback and neurofeedback, and I've done a presentation in the past on the work I did there. And so very quickly, again, when Tom was getting all the queries back from Taylor and Francis, it came at a time when I had a bunch of stuff on my plate, and I said to John, I said, I can't do this in a reasonable amount of time without some help. And John asked if I'd be willing to let Michael Russo join me on this, draft of a chapter, and that's how Michael and I did the chapter together. He came in and did all the specifics with the APA and the referencing and the specifics that Taylor and Francis wanted with their inquiries that I just at that point in time was too overwhelmed to do on my own. So it's a good chapter, and nowadays we're seeing more of this. We're seeing people like Michael Griffin did a nice talk at ISNR, and I think he's going to do one for us later on working in residential settings with kids. And I'm actually doing some mentoring now with people who were using a certain system that are working in schools and in other residential programs as well. Just did a meeting this morning with some people that are in a startup working with their school and kids who were, specialized programs for kids in trouble with the law and so forth. So that's the basis of that chapter, and I think it helps. Hopefully, it encourages people to use this in these sorts of settings, which is pretty rare right now. It's not highly popular. There's only a few people in the country I'm aware of using neurofeedback in programs like that.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Yeah, I can just echo the importance and the difficulty of working with forensic populations. Something that I do as part of my work, and they're very, very intractable. It's hard to even find one who wants to improve, wants to self-improve. One of the requirements frankly, I'll go off topic a little bit. One of the things I've found with clients is that they need to know that there's a problem, basically, and they have to want to get better. And it's as if someone knows they have a problem with their knee or their shoulder and they want it to get better, and so they do what's appropriate habit-wise and exercise and medications and therapeutics to do that. In the forensic populations, you're obviously faced with enormous amounts of denial and obfuscation and excuse-making and such. So we're looking to stimulate them to have self-responsibility and self-regulation, the ability to self-reflect, and that could sometimes never happen. Some clients are so intractable. So it's a very noble direction to be trying to work with offenders. And, we really appreciate Robert and Michael's contribution to this. So that's the first section on clinical practice. As you can see, we've been around the world already, just with those overviews. I'll go to the second part and start going through. Okay, the second part, which is pediatric, very, very interesting articles. The articles are very different and very distinctive. Merlin Hurd's article focuses on training kids younger than 6 years of age. And she obviously has done a lot of work with these populations, and she's very, very effective. And her chapter, again, really goes around the world talking about different methods. She probably has more methods in her chapter than anybody, more databases, more interventions, and beautiful questionnaires and decision tools to be used to help tease out what is going on with these really young kids and what you're going to do when you start really trying to work with them. And she presents a cortical model, which is similar to what we're going to see when we talk about Jonathan Walker in his chapter. But she does, for each site, talk about which aspects of function are affected, and whether it's emotional attention or expression or logical or sensory motor, a really good reference toward picking sites and showing QEEG changes as specific issues are addressed. And interestingly, Merlin talks about the things with Barry Sturman, things she's learned with Bob Thatcher, things she's learned through Thought Technologies. It just goes around and around. Len Oaks. Merlin's chapter itself is kind of a round trip around all the different odds and ends. And you'll see that this is an individual who just keeps changing and trying new things and working very, very adaptively in an art form. If anyone has made neurofeedback into an art, it's Merlin. So her chapter itself is so full of anecdotes and case studies and stories that you can read it itself just as a just interest. She gives dates and times of when she went to a training and what she learned. She sets a beautiful example. And then Teresa Drax, who's in Germany, she is a pediatrician, and she has published previously on this specific topic. And what she's doing is using Z-scores and surface maps and Loretta as part of really a psychiatric intervention. And she puts the kids into different challenge conditions and watches EEG changes. And she'll challenge them with talking about the parents, talking about school, talking about friends, reacting so that Teresa can get a grip on stressors and dominant themes or motifs in the lives of these kids, and looking very, very detailed at Z-score charts, Z-score tables, and S-Loretta brain images. And some of her examples are very dramatic, where she shows left and right shifts in gamma as the kids are exposed to different questions or different materials, or what are they thinking about. And for example, she shows the child thinking about his favorite dish, and the left hemisphere lights up frontally, and then the child thinks about bullying, and you see the right hemisphere oscillating then in gamma. And Teresa talks specifically about the therapeutic use of this type of information, being able to then work with kids who are suffering from stress, trauma, bullying, and then subsequently have attention problems, learning problems, emotional problems. And I know Teresa is working very hard and continuing to evolve, and hers is one of the chapters. I know there were several cases where they said as soon as my chapter was done, I wanted to write it all over again. And we simply had to say, you can't write it all over again. There will be another book, and you can publish more. But this is part of the struggle. Even if it took 2 or 3 years to get the book out, some of the chapters are considered, the authors say, well, that's yesterday's news. But it's still very, very current. You've probably not seen that before unless you've seen her other papers. Okay, so we had 3 neurologists, as I mentioned, who we decided that it made sense to bring their work together. Jonathan Walker provides one of the most succinct, detailed, beautiful summaries of conditions, characteristic QEEG abnormalities, and neurofeedback protocols. Those of you who have read and know Jonathan, he has published, dozens of clinically oriented papers, and he's famous for doing studies with an N of 40 or an N of 60 or an N of 100, and he does list his references. Jonathan's work has included anger control, dysgraphia, dyslexia, enuresis, epilepsy, seizures, migraine headaches, post-traumatic stress, anxiety, and depression. And he uses all different types, primarily power training, as well as coherence training. But it's very, it's almost surgical in his choice, not unlike the way Richard NewMind will give you specific sites, frequency bands, directions to use. And Jonathan has his perspective on that. And it's really many pages. And then, again, a pretty enormous 73 citations in his bibliography. So if you're working with any population and you want the citations about whether it's traumatic brain injury, chronic fatigue, cerebral palsy, eating disorders, et cetera, Jonathan's chapter has lots of citations where you can go to the literature and see what has been published for evidence on that. We were then happy that Lucas Coberta contributed, and he uses Z-score training and QEEGs in his neurology practice. Again, Lucas is one who has really gotten out there and published quite a bit, and his chapter includes reports on work with headaches and the neuralgia and other types of issues, and case studies. and pre and post analysis, pre and post evaluations, and variety of clients. He's worked with university professors, and he's worked with athletes and autistics. And I'm just going through his chapter. It has 9 cases, and in each one, he's describing how Loretta was used, how the Z-scores were used, what the QEEG looked like. And again, good to see a neurologist's perspective on bringing in QEEG. And he was one of the first people to really move forward with Loretta and do neurofeedback, showing that it truly is evidence-based. The efficacy is demonstratable, and that's his report. Then Harry Karasides, who's a neurologist we work closely with and teach with, quite frankly, wrote on concussion and sports concussion management. And his chapter gives very good introductory material on the physics, literally, and the pathophysiology of head injuries and contact with sports. This is very relevant to any clinician who has any client who's suffered any kind of concussion. We have clients who fell out of vehicles and were struck with baseball, for example. And Harry's work really talks about how you can converge information from CT, fMRI, PET, SPECT, QEEG, cognitive testing, etc. And what are the factors in managing these clients? Exercise, sleep, alcohol, drug use, etc., etc. Harry manages many clients with TBIs and concussions. And so this is a good resource. He also talks about comorbidities and the effects of other situations, other extenuating concerns such as mood disorders, chronic fatigue, Parkinson's, sleep disorders, etc., etc. And then how to heal. What is the healing process post-concussion? And this is, Harry's got a lot of information talking about post-concussion recovery and how that relates to QEEG and how to handle clients, for example, who've been in a motor vehicle accident and are struggling with recovery, have emotional issues, etc. So those are the 3 chapters from the neurology perspective. We then have 3 chapters on dyslexia, very varied. One is with Tony Steffert and Beverly, who have worked with dyslexics for a long time. And they're giving data on EEGs and event-related potentials, ERPs related to dyslexia, and the use of neurofeedback. Quite frankly, a lot of their work is with Yuri Kropotov, and we're very happy to have that perspective brought into this book. So if you want to know specifically how that population of practitioners who have been working with the event-related potentials and with the Russian technology and Loretta, how they approach specifically reading and dyslexia in their practice in England. It's good information, and it's information that's not as available generally because Beverly and Tony aren't as present over on this side of the ocean. So we were happy to get them over. And then Kurt Thornton, who has been doing work like this for many decades, since the 70s, wrote a beautiful chapter really summarizing his current view of allocation of resources and how reading is built up from functional aspects in the brain. And he has his own data on brain connectivity and reading conditions. He does a lot of work in different reading conditions, and that's something that we need to move more into. And he sets a really good example for that. Well, they're reading and doing tasks, and what are the changes with tasks, and what are the changes developmentally? And he gives a very functional analysis. He looks at issues like delayed recall, comparison with normative samples, and combining non-clinical data with the clinical data so that you can really understand just because, and this is an interesting point, you know, just because we see a client with a disorder and then we see a variability in the EEG does not mean that the two have to be connected. That kid may have an EEG deviation that's not related to the clinical issues. And Kirtley's chapter helps to clarify what are normal variations and what is the real significance when you see something in connectivity or activation in a child. And so that's that section. And then we have 4 chapters which are specifically mentioning Loretta and S-Loretta and Z-scores. Mark Smith wrote a chapter, a good summary of his clinical experience using S-Loretta training, Z-score training. He has a lot of client stories, you know, the client's motor issues and what their internal experiences are. And Mark is great. He is a social worker. He works very, very closely with every single client. And nonetheless, he's always got his eye on EEGs, QEEGs. And his chapter talks about really, really difficult clients, borderline personality disorders, violent people, real deviant behavior problems, compulsive behaviors, addictive behaviors, criminal behaviors even. So there's some information in Mark's chapter that's even relevant to the issue of working with deviant and criminal types of behaviors. And then we have a chapter from Israel, from Getter Kaplan and Doron Totter, and they work with PTSD. And Doron is a physician, and he talks about the brain activation data from S-Loretta and QEEGs and the network implications, his view of fear conditioning in PTSD and how that relates to extinction training and which parts of the prefrontal cortex are involved in this top-down regulation of emotional conflict. Very, very good, almost philosophical discussion of these clinical issues, and the aspects of intrusion and hypervigilance and avoidance, and specifically pairing these out in your clients so that you're very clear on which aspects of the PTSD constellation you're addressing. And then Joseph Guan, who is in the Philippines, is actually trained as a music therapist, but he's a brilliant clinician, and he gives many case studies on using Z-score training for quite a wide range of disorders, including developmental delay, vertigo, dementia, Parkinsonism, bipolar, ADHD, autism. Joseph is one of the earliest authors on Z-scores. He's a co-author on the first summary of case studies that we published. And he's one of those people who really seems to have no qualms about going after his clients' issues and trying to help them. And he uses brain avatar and brain imaging exclusively, pretty much as a way to approach these clients. So it's not really exactly one size fits all. It's one method can be tailored to the clients, and that's very valuable. Again, he is as much in the trenches as anyone. And finally, we have a chapter by Penny Jean, and Penny Jean really went very ambitiously on this chapter. It is really a full tutorial and explanation of Z-score training and Loretta Z-score training, and she's got some very good drawings and pictures and illustrative examples and the origins of what we call PZOK and how we use it and why we use it. And she talks about how Brainmaster worked to develop a lot of these things. And Penny Jean was one of the driving forces for Z-score training for the last 10 years, always coming to us with new things that were needed. How can we improve this, change that, add features? And her chapter then really talks about the advantages of Z-scores, of 4-channel training, advantages of multi-channel, advantages of Surface, advantages of Loretta, etc. And it's one of the longest chapters in the book. And we kind of kid her. We tell her yours is the best chapter in the book. She says, of course it is. But it really is very, very exhaustive. She put an enormous amount of work into it. When do you choose 19-channel training? When do you choose 4-channel training? What are the advantages? How do you choose training variables? What is it you look for? And then actually, how do you go in and monkey with software to do something useful for your clients? And she does show using QEEG Pro as well as live Z-scores. And the more advanced techniques, the Z plus that we use, the PZ, the momentum, we have a measure of momentum of Z-scores. And she talks a lot about those. So now we have authors who are going into brain dynamics. There's this guy named Richard Sutar, who we're very, very happy that Richard was able to contribute. Richard, are you there? Do you want to make a comment on what you did for us?
Well, we're low on time, so I don't want to say too much. Most people who come to the Lunch and Learn are very familiar with it because it's built into the map system. But the basic thing is that it explains the theory behind the whole map system and protocol process that we use, and that and explaining to people that it's really an update of standard neurofeedback, and showing that it issued from all the original work by the authors and by Joel and everybody, and that it's just going from a 1-channel model to a 2-channel model, and how the dynamics of that radically change when you're in 2 channels, and fundamentally that's what it's about.
Thank you, Richard. Appreciate it. Yeah, we'll move along. Paul Swingle contributed, again, material, some of which you will know from his other books. But again, it's beautifully captured in this book, how he uses the clinical cue. The nice thing is you have a beautiful appendix of the clinical cue. So people who use Paul's or want to use Paul's and are looking for a nice, clear, tabular description of his clinical, what's his mini cue basically, is in this chapter as well. So it's very good. Kathy Abbott then decided to focus on withdrawal from medications, and has a very nice chapter that talks about clients who were depressed, for example, restless leg syndrome coming in, treatment of Parkinson's, opiate addicts, and et cetera. And again, a lot of references on medications. So it's a good resource for that. And then finally, Leonardo Mascaro, our friend from Brazil, contributed a chapter on using the raw EEG and looking for specific markers that can be seen in the EEG. Leonardo is interesting because he started with Margaret Ayers, and Margaret Ayers looked at raw EEGs a lot. And so Leonardo's chapter brings in a lot of that material and talks about how the raw EEG can be used to identify specific issues. It's a good chapter. Then part 7 on alpha theta protocol. Cindy Curson wrote on handling anxiety and how to use alpha training and alpha theta training in anxiety, and she gives examples of surface feedback. And then Lincoln Stoller, another friend of ours from the Boston area, wrote on using alpha theta in a clinical outreach. For example, clients who are not as able to get into a clinic. He works with homeless people. He talks about setting up a station so that neurofeedback could be provided in a not even outpatient, and out of the clinic type of setting. So it's a very socially conscious, social activist kind of view of looking at it. And finally, section 8, we have 4 chapters on emerging paradigms. Jon Frederick summarizes his work on EEG state discrimination which draws from Joe Kamiya's work in the past. Can people tell what state they're in? And Jon has done really interesting controlled studies on whether people can discern and experience whether they're in a certain state. And then he talks about then the implications for control of states. And Mark Smith then, with two of his colleagues, puts a chapter on ISF, the infra-slow training. Again, case studies, which give you specific detail. When you read the case studies, you can kind of put yourself into that setting and see what Mark and his colleagues experienced. Also, good references on infra-slow for people who really need to know where is the documentation on infra-slow oscillations from the scientific literature. Then Roger Riss and Fred Ulam put a chapter on transcranial DC stimulation, foundational in nature, talking about the mode of action, the type of equipment, the clinical applications, and use in depression, addiction, PTSD, chronic pain, headache, tinnitus, neurodegenerative disorders, Parkinson's, et cetera, et cetera. Quite an extensive summaries of what studies have shown using the DC stimulation. And finally, Nancy White and Leonard Richards decided they would like to write on the gut connection. And they contributed a chapter on this very important topic having to do with probiotics and intestinal bacteria and the brain-gut axis, and learning that we need to address not just nutrition but gut health in our clients if we really, really want to help them deal. A lot of these people have heavy metals issues, they have hormonal issues, liver, thyroid, other GI things, and they put together a practice model, how to create a working relationship with clients around the gut axis. So there's a lot of figures. As I say, there's 32 color plates, and if you get the ebook, it's entirely color figures. And the last thing I'm going to say is, this is probably not the end. There's going to be another book. So start looking at your calendars and let us know who might want to contribute to the next one. Thank you, Richard, and thank you, Rob.
Hey, Tom, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to reading this book. It's number one on my list when I hop on an airplane soon to go fly to Texas. And so I'll be looking forward to reading it. Great topics, great chapters. All right. Thanks, everybody. Richard, any final last words?
No, just thanks very much, Tom, for doing the book. This is a huge labor. Unless you've done
I do want to say finally, the proceeds go to the Foundation for Neurofeedback and Neuromodulation Research.
Fantastic.
So if you get this book, the proceeds are, after Routledge pays their expenses, everything is going to the Foundation for Research.
It truly is a labor of love.
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
All right,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
We'll
Tom.
see you Monday night at Neuro at Night. Thanks, Tom. Take care.
Thank you.
Happy holidays. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. Happy holidays, everyone.